The sound of crystal glasses rang through the ballroom, but the moment came like a crack of thunder, a single act that silenced music, laughter, and pride. Grant Whitaker, billionaire CEO, leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp with contempt, and spat in the face of a young black waitress named Simone Harris. For an instant, the world stopped moving. The charity gala had been staged to display generosity, not cruelty. Chandelier light glittered over polished marble floors. Guests in tailored gowns and suits held their forks mid-air, frozen between indulgence and shame. The orchestra faltered, bows hovering above strings. Every eye fell to the white napkin Simone clutched in her hand, trembling, stained. No longer just cloth, but a mark of humiliation carried in public view. Simone had made a simple mistake. A glass of water set slightly off-center. A tray passed too close to a chair. Nothing that deserved more than a polite correction. But Whitaker's power thrived on small punishments. To him, disrespect was sport, and his wealth made him believe no one could ever call him to account. She stood there, still as a statue, shoulders drawn but not bent. Her uniform, pressed and plain, now bore an insult no detergent could wash away. The napkin, once meant to serve others, became a shield she gripped, her knuckles whitening as she tried to steady her breath. Whitaker smirked. His diamond cufflinks caught the chandelier's light, gleaming like cold stars against his black suit. He tapped the table once, a gesture of dismissal, as though the matter was finished. To him it was nothing. To the room it was everything. The contrast was sharp, gilded wealth against human dignity. Whitaker reclined in a velvet chair, while Simone stood before him with a napkin pressed to her cheek, her silence heavier than any spoken protest. $1,000 worth of wine stood beside his plate, yet in that moment it was her dignity, not his fortune, that carried weight. A murmur rippled along the edge of the hall. Some guests looked away, their eyes fixed on the floor, unwilling to confront what they had seen. Others stared, shocked but motionless, as if unsure whether morality had a place in a room built on money. The orchestra lowered their instruments. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim, their light caught in still air. Simone did not move. She refused to shrink. Every second stretched, each heartbeat louder than the last. Her silence carried the echo of generations taught that dignity must never be surrendered, no matter the insult, no matter the stage. And yet the room was complicit. No voice rose, no hand intervened. Fear of Whitaker's power chained them to their seats. They knew his reach, contracts, favors, donations. To confront him meant risk. To stay silent meant safety. Still, the image could not be erased. A man of fortune, using power as weapon, and a woman of service. Holding her ground with nothing but a napkin, the gala no longer shone with prestige. It smelled of false roses and stale arrogance. The glittering glasses looked more like mirrors of cowardice than symbols of celebration. Every polished surface reflected the truth. Wealth without dignity is rot dressed in silk. Whitaker raised his fork again, as if to reclaim normalcy. But normalcy had already been shattered. The air was thick, the silence charged, as though the hall itself waited for judgment. Simone stood, still as stone, napkin in hand. Her eyes did not lower. The room had seen what it could not unsee, and then nothing. No applause, no defense, just silence. Silence that blanketed the hall, heavy as chains, daring someone, anyone, to speak. The ballroom gleamed like a jewel box, but the shine masked a deeper rot. Light from crystal chandeliers poured down in golden beams, striking marble floors so polished they seemed like mirrors. Perfume drifted through the air, rare blends flown in from Paris, sharp enough to make the whole room smell of money. Every table was dressed in white linen, every fork aligned as though precision itself could buy morality. This was the city's most powerful night. Business leaders, senators, and heirs filled the hall, all gathered beneath glass walls that reflected their pride back at them. They came dressed in borrowed glamour, competing to prove who could stand closest to Grant Whitaker, the billionaire CEO who ruled the room without speaking. His presence alone bent the night around him. Whitaker had built his empire not by kindness, but by force. Rivals feared his calls. Employees whispered about the way careers vanished after crossing him. Partners signed contracts with hands that shook, knowing one wrong step could invite destruction. His reputation was not wealth alone. It was intimidation turned into currency. And so, even here, even now, the humiliation of one waitress was treated as a detail to be overlooked. Simone Harris stood marked by insult, napkin in hand, while the rest of the hall held its breath. The chandeliers sparkled as if nothing had happened. The orchestra waited for a signal that might restore the night. But nothing could polish away the stain everyone had seen. The contrast was painful. On one side, rows of wine glasses glittered like trophies. On the other, a single young woman in uniform stood in silence, carrying dignity heavier than all the diamonds in the room. The floor was marble, but the truth beneath it was clay. Glamour filled every corner, yet shame filled the air. Guests looked at Whitaker with the same mixture of awe and fear they always did. They told themselves he was untouchable, that silence was wisdom. To them, power had always decided what was right. But the memory of what they had seen could not be erased by wealth, applause, or glass walls. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, sipping from his glass as if the night still belonged to him. His cufflinks flashed under the chandelier, each reflection a reminder of his reach. No one dared disturb his illusion, not the senators who owed him favors, not the donors who lived on his contracts, not the musicians who waited for his nod. The city itself seemed to hide behind those glass walls, pretending its wealth could cover its cowardice. But the image lingered, a man of power using cruelty as sport, and a woman of service standing in silence, refusing to vanish. Outside the ballroom, the skyline glimmered, towers of steel and glass piercing the night. From a distance, the city looked flawless, but inside the gala, every glittering surface carried the reflection of shame. What is wealth worth when silence buys its applause? Her name was Simone Harris, and she was not invisible. To many in the ballroom, she was just another uniform moving between tables, a quiet hand pouring water, a steady step balancing trays. But behind the black jacket and white apron lived a history carved by struggle and strengthened by principle. Simone grew up in Detroit, in a neighborhood where cracked sidewalks told stories of families holding on with little more than faith. Her mother, Lorraine, worked in a sewing factory by day and stitched clothes for neighbors by night. It was Lorraine who repeated one lesson again and again, a lesson sharper than any warning. Dignity is non-negotiable. Those words shaped Simone more than any textbook. They became her armor when money was scarce, when lights flickered, when the noise of sirens at night reminded her that the world was not gentle. Now in her 20s, she carried more than her own weight. Her younger brother Daniel was 2 years into college studying engineering. Tuition did not pay itself, so Simone stacked hours. Morning shifts in diners, evening shifts at receptions like this one. Her body was often tired, but her resolve never bent. Each tray she carried was a step toward his future. Each dollar she saved was proof that sacrifice could lift someone higher. This was why the moment with Grant Whitaker mattered. The insult was not only against her uniform, it was against her sacrifices, her family, her mother's command. The stain on the napkin reached back to every hour she had worked to keep dignity alive, in a world that often tried to strip it away. Simone stood in the ballroom, the spotlight of shame forced upon her. Yet she did not crumble. Her mother's voice whispered across memory, telling her that money could vanish and power could fall, but dignity had to be guarded at all costs. She heard it as clearly as the strings of the orchestra now lying silent. The contrast was cruel and undeniable. Around her, wealth towered, gowns stitched with silver thread, champagne poured into glasses that cost more than her week's pay. And yet, with all their jewels and power, the room could not match the quiet strength of one waitress holding her ground. Simone's hands trembled at first, but she stilled them. She folded the napkin, not to hide the stain, but to claim control of it. It was no longer just a cloth marked by insult. It was a banner of resistance. Every breath she took steadied her posture. Every second she refused to collapse deepened the moral weight of what had happened. She could have bowed her head, could have slipped away into the kitchen, swallowed the moment like countless others in history. Instead, she did the unthinkable in a room where silence was the rule. Simone straightened her back. Grant Whitaker wore his authority like a second skin. To the ballroom, he was not simply a man at a table. He was the table itself, the structure everyone gathered around, afraid to disturb. His power filled the air as surely as the chandeliers filled the ceiling with light. Whitaker's rise had been carved through corridors of fear. He began as a restless young broker in New York, moving deals faster than others could read them. Where others saw rules, he saw obstacles. Where rivals saw contracts, he saw leverage. Every handshake was a weapon disguised as friendship. The mergers that carried his name were celebrated in the press as strokes of genius. In truth, they were built on quiet threats, delayed payments, and whispered promises of ruin. Competitors who resisted him found themselves cut off from banks, blacklisted from markets, or drowned in lawsuits they could not afford. Those who survived learned one truth: Whitaker did not compete, he consumed. It was this history that hovered like a shadow over the gala. Guests knew his story, and it explained their silence. No one wanted to be the next casualty of his ambition. His empire, Whitaker International, was more than steel and glass towers. It was a climate of intimidation. The man at the center believed he had placed himself beyond consequence. Tonight, the illusion was complete. He sat in a velvet chair, posture easy, his smile thin but controlled. His glass was filled, his plate untouched. The hall adjusted itself to him, even as the stain on Simone's napkin stood in silent rebellion. The symbols around him were chosen carefully. His suit was tailored in London, the fabric a dark sheen that caught the light. His watch was Swiss, its ticking masked by the orchestra's pause. But it was his diamond cufflinks that drew the eye. They blazed under the chandelier like twin beacons of wealth. To Whitaker, they were marks of victory. To the room, they were proof of his reach. Yet symbols carry more than one meaning. The cufflinks, sharp-edged and flawless, did not only shine, they gleamed like chains waiting to be fastened. Every flash of light from their surface hinted at fragility. Diamonds may appear eternal, but under enough pressure, even they can break. Whitaker believed he was untouchable. Years of unchecked success had trained him to confuse fear with respect. To him, this night was no different from the others. Another gala, another crowd bending to his presence. The humiliation he dealt out was, in his mind, just a ripple on water. It would fade. The city always forgave its kings. But beneath the polished surface, something was shifting. Eyes that once admired him now lingered with doubt. Guests who once laughed at his jokes now studied their glasses, uneasy. The air that once carried his reputation like perfume now felt heavy with unspoken judgment. Whitaker did not notice. Or perhaps he refused to notice. He lifted his hand, cufflinks blazing as if daring anyone to confront him. His mask of power was polished, but cracks had begun to spread where no one could see. He leaned back, confident as ever, convinced that silence was loyalty. But silence can turn into evidence, and fear can turn into witness. The diamonds on his wrist caught the light again. Brilliant yet brittle. Even diamonds can fracture under pressure. It began with a tremor in the air, the kind that turns music into noise and luxury into shame. The gala had been comfortable a moment ago. Soft strings, easy laughter, the warm glow of chandeliers. Now the warmth felt staged. People adjusted their cuffs, lifted their glasses, and tried to pretend that nothing had happened at Grant Whitaker's table. But pretending has a sound, and the room began to hear it. The shuffle of uneasy feet, the scrape of a chair half pushed back, the thin cough of someone buying time. Simone Harris stood where she had been forced to stand, the folded napkin in her hand like a small white flag that refused to surrender. Whitaker sat with the calm of a man used to winning. His diamond cufflinks flashed as he lifted his glass, as if light itself still served him. Between them, the room faced a test. At the nearest table, a woman in a silver dress whispered, "Did you see?" And then stopped. Her companion stared at the tablecloth. Two donors at the back argued without speaking. Their eyes said, "Say nothing." Their hands, clenched on their laps, said, "This is wrong." A senator shifted, weighing the distance between conscience and career. A hotel manager hovered near the doors, measuring risk like a cost sheet. The orchestra's bows hung in midair. The conductor waited for a cue that would not come. The chandeliers kept shining, but their light felt colder, as if it had learned the truth. Then came the smallest change. A phone lifted. Not high, just enough. The hand that held it shook once, then steadied. The camera lens did not blink. It watched. Across the room, another phone rose behind a menu card. A young server paused near the water station, eyes fixed on Simone, jaw set. At a corner table, a board member's assistant stared at Whitaker with the look of someone who knows the cost of silence, and tonight cannot pay it. The whispers grew. Uncalled for. He can't. He did. Words slid under the music like a river beneath ice. Eyes drifted from the centerpieces to the center of the harm. Some guests averted their gaze, choosing comfort over truth. Others sat taller, as if their spines had remembered what they are for. Whitaker sensed the shift but mistook it for a breeze. He laid his fork down with care. He had tamed rooms before. He would tame this one. He folded his hands. The cufflinks flashed again. Hard light, clean edges, the shape of a warning and perhaps of a future restraint. The hotel manager approached, smoothing his tie. "Mr. Whitaker," he began softly, "perhaps we could—" Whitaker's eyes cut like glass. The manager stopped. Fear has a posture. Everyone recognized it. At the back wall, a young woman pressed record. Her reflection appeared in the window beyond the glass, a faint outline against the city lights. She lowered the screen so it would not be seen. Her breathing slowed. "Steady," she told herself. "Tell the truth with your hands." Simone did not bow her head. She did not speak. She held the napkin like a promise kept. The stain on it seemed darker now. Not just a mark, but a message. Dignity can be injured. It does not disappear. A donor stood and cleared his throat. No words came, he sat. Another guest half rose, glanced at Whitaker, and sank back down. The room strained against an old habit, the habit of letting money decide what is real. The first ripple of accountability reached the table to Simone's left. A woman there slid her chair aside to face Simone, not away from her. It was a small turn, a public refusal to look away. Her husband followed. A neighbor adjusted his seat to match them. 3 chairs now, aligned like witnesses. From the kitchen door, 2 line cooks watched. Aprons still on, hands still gloved. One nodded once, almost invisible. The other raised his chin, a quiet salute. Staff along the wall drew closer by a single step, then another. No one spoke. The steps were enough. Outside the windows, the city skyline glittered, rigid and distant. Inside, the glass of the room did not protect what it reflected. Phones continued to rise. Someone whispered, "Record." Someone else whispered, "Don't you dare." The 2 words met in the air and refused to cancel each other. Whitaker shifted, for the first time unsure which way the room leaned. He looked to his lawyers seated 2 tables away. The closer one gave a tiny shake of the head. Not yet. The other stared at the phones, doing quiet math and not liking the result. The conductor set his baton down. The hush thickened. Accountability is a slow tide until it is not. A chair scraped firm and final. A guest near the center aisle stood. He was neither the richest nor the loudest, but he was the first to let his voice carry farther than his fear. He turned from Whitaker to Simone, then to the room, and made a decision that glass could not hide. I saw everything. The first siren did not wail. It vibrated in a pocket. Security moved before the sound reached the room. 2 managers stepped from the shadows, headsets bright against black jackets, their eyes fixed on Grant Whitaker. The gala's shine tried to hold, but the light looked thinner now, as if it knew what was coming. Phones had already done their work. The footage, Simone, the napkin, the insult, traveled faster than any apology. A clip leapt from 1 screen to 10, from 10 to 100, then beyond the glass walls to a city awake and watching. In minutes, the building security office lit up with calls. A hotel executive leaned over a monitor, face pale, and said the words that made the night turn. "Stop the music. Call the police." At Whitaker's table, his lawyers rose like a drill team. One reached for his sleeve, the other for his ego. "Grant, let's step out," the nearest one whispered. "We'll handle this." He spoke in a voice meant to calm storms and stockholders. Whitaker did not stand. He set down his glass with care, as if the world still obeyed the weight of his hand. "This is overblown," he said. "It will pass." He reached for his napkin, then stopped, as if remembering which napkin mattered tonight. Across the aisle, Simone remained still. The folded white cloth in her hand had become the only standard the room recognized. Security formed a quiet triangle around Whitaker. They did not touch him. They asked, "Sir, please come with us." He smiled without mirth. "You don't know who you're speaking to." "We do," one said. "That's why we're asking." Around them, witnesses held their breath. The orchestra placed instruments in their cases. A senator checked his phone, saw the video, and closed his eyes. A donor texted a single word to a board chat. Now, Whitaker's lawyers started the scramble. One called a crisis firm. Another called a judge he knew from golf. A third pressed the hotel general manager, citing contracts and donations. The answers came back colder than expected. "The video is everywhere. The hotel will cooperate. The police are en route." A hush fell as two officers entered at a measured pace, uniforms steady as metronomes. No rush, no show. They spoke first with the hotel, then with security, then with a witness who had recorded the act. The chain of custody began in real time, link by careful link, inside the same hall that had hosted applause an hour before. "Mr. Whitaker," an officer said, "we need you to step aside and answer a few questions." He rose at last, drawing himself to full height, adjusting his jacket as if to rebuild the mask. His diamond cufflinks flashed once more under the chandelier. He spoke to the room instead of the officers. "This is ridiculous. You people are hysterical." The officer's reply was simple. "Sir, your statements can be taken outside." The lawyers pushed in. "We are cooperating," one said quickly. "But there's no need for what?" The officer asked. "For theater." The lawyer finished with a weak smile. "This is not theater," the officer said. "This is procedure." The word landed with weight. Procedure was the opposite of whim. Procedure did not bend to donors or threats. Procedure was a road that led to consequence. They guided Whitaker a few steps from the table. The nearest officer nodded to security. The gala watched the tiny mechanics of accountability. A pen scratching a name. A phone placed face down. A timeline spoken into a body camera. The diamond cufflinks glittered, small stars on a sinking ship. "Hands, please," the officer said. The room inhaled. Whitaker's jaw hardened. For a heartbeat, he looked again at Simone, as if to pull her back into his script. She did not move. The napkin did not drop. The symbol he had tried to define now defined him. A lawyer tried one last angle. "Not here," he whispered. "There are cameras." "There are always cameras," the officer said. Whitaker lifted his wrists. A security guard reached forward, gentle but firm, and slid the cufflink from one sleeve, then the other. The diamonds clicked on the linen like small stones losing their shine. In their place, metal closed with a plain, working sound. No glamour, only purpose. The hall felt it. Wealth turning into evidence, swagger turning into weight. The same floor that reflected chandeliers now reflected a procession. The officers, the lawyers, the man who thought he owned the night. Guests did not clap. No one spoke. The city, it seemed, had chosen to breathe through them. They turned toward the doors. The chains were not heavy, but their meaning was. Whitaker tried to square his shoulders and found that the gesture no longer fit. They passed the center aisle. They passed the tables of donors and names. They passed the silent orchestra and the glass that failed to hide anything. And then they reached the place where the night had broken. Simone stood there, steady. The napkin folded like a line held. Gasps filled the hall as he is led past Simone. The chains were loud, but her silence was louder as Grant Whitaker was led away. All eyes turned not to the man who fell, but to the woman who stood. Simone Harris had not moved from her place. The napkin remained in her hand, folded once, its edges pressed tight between her fingers. The stain it carried had not been erased, yet in her grip it no longer looked like defeat. It looked like proof. The hall waited for her to react. Some expected tears. Others expected anger. A few imagined she might smile at his fall. But Simone did none of these things. Her face was calm, steady, untouched by the noise around her. She did not gloat. She did not crumble. She stood. The contrast was striking. Whitaker had sat surrounded by power, wrapped in wealth, guarded by lawyers. Yet all of that had been stripped from him in minutes. Simone had only her uniform, her posture, and a napkin. Yet she held the greater strength. The witnesses saw it. Donors who had once bowed toward Whitaker now studied her, realizing that the night's true center was not a billionaire in chains, but a waitress who refused to break. Staff members at the edges of the room found courage in her stillness. Guests whispered her name, some for the first time, as if learning who had carried the real weight of the night. Simone's silence was not emptiness. It was resistance shaped into posture. It was her mother's teaching. Dignity is non-negotiable, made flesh in a single stance. The napkin in her hand symbolized every hour she had worked, every sacrifice she had made, every injustice she had endured. And by refusing to let it fall, she transformed it into a banner of resilience. Her brother's face flickered across her mind. Daniel bent over his textbooks, unaware of what had just unfolded. The money she earned tonight would still help pay for his tuition. Her long hours had not been erased by Whitaker's insult. They had been honored by her refusal to bow. The gala, once meant to display wealth and prestige, had become something else entirely. It was now a stage of witness, and Simone, without a word, had redefined its meaning. Whitaker's downfall would fill headlines. His arrest would dominate broadcasts. But long after the reports ended, the image that would remain was of a young black waitress, shoulders square, holding a napkin that told the story no luxury could silence. Her strength was not in volume but in presence, not in retaliation but in endurance. She had turned humiliation into testimony, not by speaking but by standing. The room felt it. The silence around her was no longer heavy with fear. It was charged with respect. Even those who had stayed quiet earlier now understood. Strength had not been displayed in Whitaker's wealth, but in Simone's resilience. She did not need applause. She did not need words. She only needed to stand. Strength does not always speak. Sometimes it stands. The night ended in handcuffs, but the morning began in headlines. By sunrise, Grant Whitaker's name filled every screen. News anchors repeated the words disgrace, arrest, and unthinkable, as if reciting a litany. Images of the billionaire being escorted from the gala looped on television. Online, the clip spread faster than any press release could contain. Boardrooms that once echoed with his commands now buzzed with panic. Stock tickers dipped. Executives scrambled to distance themselves, rehearsing statements of shock, drafting letters of resignation from boards that had seemed untouchable only hours before. But the city's true focus was not on him. What people remembered was not the collapse of a billionaire's mask, but the quiet strength of the woman he tried to erase. The frame that replayed most often did not show Whitaker's chains. It showed Simone Harris standing in her uniform, napkin in hand, posture unbroken. Social media carried her image across neighborhoods, across communities, across the world. One post read, "This is what dignity looks like." Another, "She stood still, and the world moved." A photograph from the gala, captured on a guest's phone, showed Simone with her back straight as Whitaker was led away. That single image gathered millions of shares. Commentators tried to analyze the meaning. Some pointed to the long history of service workers silenced by wealth. Others noted how rare it was to see power confronted not with anger, but with stillness. Yet all agreed, Simone's silence had been stronger than Whitaker's fortune. In offices downtown, leaders whispered about liability, about contracts, about investigations sure to follow. But outside those towers of glass, in kitchens, classrooms, and bus stops, the story sounded different. Parents told their children, "Look at her." Workers showed one another the clip and nodded, as if finding courage in its replay. For those who had watched the gala in person, the memory was sharper still. They recalled how the chandeliers dimmed, how whispers rose, how phones lifted. They remembered the sound of chains closing. Yes, but more than that. They remembered the sight of Simone's shoulders squared, her silence unshaken. The contrast could not be ignored. Whitaker had measured power in money, lawyers, and fear. Simone measured power in nothing more than the refusal to bow. His empire cracked in the space of a night. Her dignity, carried in the simplest cloth, outlasted him. The city would keep talking. Lawsuits would unfold. Banks would cut ties. Politicians would debate. But years later, when people spoke of this night, it would not be the billionaire's fall they recalled most clearly. It would be the waitress who stood with a napkin, calm and unbroken, against a man who believed himself above consequence. The story was no longer his. It was hers. The night was remembered less through words and more through objects. First, there was the napkin, a simple square of cloth folded, stained, and held firm in Simone's hand. It began as an instrument of service, meant to wipe away spills and crumbs. In Whitaker's act, it became a mark of insult. Yet in Simone's stillness, it changed again. The napkin no longer spoke of humiliation. It carried dignity reclaimed. It was a reminder that strength does not need weapons. It can rest in something as ordinary as cloth, so long as the hand that holds it refuses to let go. Then came the cufflinks, diamonds cut and polished, symbols of luxury glowing under chandeliers. They represented Whitaker's belief that power could be worn, that respect could be bought. To the room, they had once meant triumph, but when they were removed, they became empty trophies stripped of meaning. Their shine could not prevent their fall. Their brilliance only exposed the hollowness of the man who wore them. Finally, there were the chains. Cold, simple, made not for show but for purpose. They were not crafted to impress investors or charm crowds. They were built to hold, to bind, to remind that no one stands above accountability. When placed on Whitaker, they did more than restrict his wrists. They announced to the world that arrogance had limits. The arc of the night could be read in these three symbols: cloth, jewels, and steel. The napkin began as service but ended as strength. The cufflinks began as victory but ended as vanity. The chains began as punishment but ended as justice. Together they formed a story that no speech could equal. People remembered the napkin because it showed how humiliation can be transformed. They remembered the cufflinks because they revealed how fragile wealth truly is. And they remembered the chains because they proved that even the powerful can be held to account. The gala had been planned to celebrate excess. Yet its legacy became these ordinary things: cloth, metal, restraint. Each object spoke louder than any applause. Each carried weight beyond its size. Objects are often overlooked, but in rare moments they rise into symbols. That night they stood as evidence of a truth the city could not ignore: that dignity, when guarded, outlasts wealth, and justice, when demanded, outlasts fear. Gold fades. Steel remains. The streets were quiet, but her steps carried the sound of something larger than silence. Simone Harris walked beneath the glow of street lamps, the night air cool against her face. The gala was behind her now. The chandeliers, the whispers, the chains, the spectacle of a man undone. Yet none of that clung to her. What she carried was smaller, lighter, but far heavier in meaning: the folded napkin in her hand. She had not kept it for revenge. She had not kept it as a trophy. She had kept it because it reminded her that even the smallest object, in the right hands, could hold the weight of truth. To anyone else, it was cloth. To her, it was proof that dignity could survive insult. There was no applause waiting on the sidewalk. No cameras followed her into the night. Her name was already racing through headlines, but the streets she walked were empty, and the world was asleep. That too was fitting. Strength often moves unseen, carried by those who do not seek the stage. Her shoes tapped against the pavement. With each step, memories returned. Her mother's voice: "Dignity is non-negotiable." Her brother's face bent over textbooks, unaware that his sister had just shown a city what those words truly meant. Her own reflection in the mirror of the ballroom floor, standing taller than she had ever stood before. The city skyline rose in the distance, glass towers gleaming faintly against the dark. Whitaker had built his life believing those towers would shield him. Tonight proved otherwise. Towers can fall, fortunes can vanish, but dignity, once guarded, cannot be stolen even by power. Simone turned a corner, passing the glow of a diner sign. Inside, a worker wiped down tables, another carried plates. She paused for a moment, watching them. They were invisible to most, as she had been at the gala. But tonight reminded her, and soon it would remind them, that invisibility is an illusion. The people who serve often carry the greatest strength. She continued on, the napkin pressed to her side. It did not weigh much, yet it felt heavier than the diamonds stripped from Whitaker's sleeves. It carried a story that no luxury could erase. For the rest of the city, the scandal would soon become numbers. Stock prices falling, contracts collapsing, deals undone. But Simone's walk home would remain untouched by those figures. Her dignity was not measured in accounts or headlines. It was measured in her refusal to bow, her decision to stand, and the quiet power of her silence. She reached her street. The lamp above her flickered once, then steadied, spilling light across her path. She lifted her chin and walked beneath it, unhurried, certain, strong. Wealth can buy applause, but dignity cannot be bought or spit away.